Buenos días a todos. Good morning to our international friends. We're going to start now, so please mute your phones. And if you have any questions, please use the chat box that we have on the upper right corner. And please make your questions, and we will take them there and make the questions to Tony at the end. As always, the session will be recorded and then posted at lawitgroup.com. And we also have our YouTube channel, which is also Lawit Group. And then you can watch all the previous webinars, and including this one, within the next probably 24 hours. Let me introduce you to my brother, Juan Carlos, who is the CEO of Lawit Group. I am Alejandro Luna. I'm the CIO, CTO.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Let us just take a second just to introduce ourselves in case you have not had the chance to participate in the past events. Basically, Lawit is the legal tech and legal innovation arm of Logistic, which is an international law firm. And what we do at Lawit is we provide consulting, technology, and services to law departments and law firms, offering practical ways to improve efficiency, quality, and business outcomes.
And as we all know, we are facing a moment of unprecedented uncertainty, but we prefer to see it as a time of opportunity. And as you know, it was important to do the digital transformation of the legal industry, but for the few past years, people have been a little bit reluctant to actually take the jump into the pool, but now we have been pushed into the pool. So now there's no choice. We have to actually do it. And a lot of people are doing it somehow. And today, most of the talk will be focused on these technologies. Our presenter today has been in this business for many, many years. And we actually had him physically as a speaker in a previous Lawit Legal Tech Summit last year. So he's a very good friend of ours. And Juan Carlos, just please tell them about this project that we have now.
We have been organizing these webinars mainly to share relevant content dealing with the business of law and legal technology. We also try to include topics dealing with the rule of law. And because of our commitment to improve the legal profession, we always try to include topics dealing with wellness. And there are going to be some upcoming webinars on that topic as well.
And to get into the matter, Tony SALDANHA, he's a globally recognized information technology and shared service executive. He's a progressive business leader with a breadth of experiences ranging from disruptive IT, shared services, outsourcing, consulting, CIO roles, technology-enabled business building, and system integration. Geographical experience from having lived in Asia, Europe, and the US, including both developed and developing markets. And last year, during our summit, he actually launched his new book, which is this one, which we see on the right. And without further ado, I'm going to be introducing Tony in the talk, The Future is Digital and How to Be Prepared. And this is our friend, Tony SALDANHA. I will let you share your screen, Tony, and just continue with the presentation. So let me get out of here and then you can continue.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alex. Let me go start my sharing. Can you see this?
Yes.
Excellent. Hey, good morning. And if you're calling from elsewhere, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Tony SALDANHA, and I'm absolutely delighted to join my friends. All of you, but then, Juan and Alex in particular. And as Alex said, yes, these are somewhat unprecedented times. And what I'm here to do is to kind of share with you an elaboration of what Alex just said, that these are also unprecedented opportunities. And secondly, what I want to do is I want to give you some very, very practical tips on how you can turn these issues into positive opportunities. But just to kind of back up a little bit, if 3 months ago, somebody had told me that CEO meetings would be conducted on Zoom, and that comedians such as Conan O'Brien on the left-hand side would actually be bombing into these Zoom meetings of CEOs. You can go watch this on YouTube. It's a very funny video. I would have thought that you were crazy. I mean, the world cannot change that much, but that is true. The world has changed that much, and but what really has not changed is what we said earlier, which is digital transformation being a huge, huge opportunity in general, but certainly for the legal industry. And I want to share with you why I am so very clear that this crisis is an opportunity for each one of us, certainly for each one of you. Now, there is a lot of talk about, how, we're in the middle of a pandemic and, the world is changing and, businesses are laying off people. And, this is actually an economic crisis. And absolutely all of that is true. But, I want to put this in the context of history. If there is one thing that history has taught us about economic crises, it is that, they actually happen in waves, right? And here you see that we are just currently in wave 2 of what is going to be a 4-stage economic recovery model, right? So the first stage for most companies, whether you're in a corporate entity or you're in a government, was essentially the scramble stage where you very quickly figure out how to keep your systems running, right? People and work. The second, which is really where we're at right now, is that you have to still kind of keep your urgent operations running, right? So if you're in the manufacturing business, how do you get your product to the market? That kind of stuff, right? But we still have 2 stages ahead of us. The first one is where organizations are going to continue to look for productivity improvement. And that is an opportunity. And then the final stage is when, the organizations that survive, this economic crisis are going to have to transform themselves, right? One of the things that I have studied and learned from previous economic crises, whether they were the 2008 global economic crisis, or the ASEAN crisis, or when the Russian economy collapsed in the early 90s, is that when companies eventually pull out of economic crisis, and when you look at their growth a few years later, you start to see this very interesting pattern, which is on the screen, which is that the best companies that win long-term actually start to pull away from the other companies during the crisis. Right. So in other words, those companies actually improve profitability during the recession and then just keep pulling away and getting better over time, right? And so that really has led me to essentially create this model, which I call the FOBI model, which what it does is it kind of talks about if your organization is fortunate in terms of it is stable, it has very strong financial foundations, and if it also is good in the market, it has got great market share. In most cases, what you're going to see is an investment to actually improve operations, right? And actually drive digitization. But on the other hand, if your organization is not very strong financially and it doesn't have a lot of market share, it is new, what you're going to have to do is still find a way to cut costs and still invest in improving business operations if you want to survive, right? So in other words, in all cases, I have seen that companies follow this model. They either use their extra cash to invest in improving productivity, or they save money elsewhere to improve productivity, right? So that basically means that digital transformation is still going to be key. We're in stage 2 of a 4-stage recovery, and stage 3 and stage 4 are still going to be about how you save money or you redirect money to invest in digital transformation, right? So that's the first point that I wanted to share, which is digital transformation, whether it is, in courts or in law firms or in other businesses, has not been canceled. It has been postponed. It has actually been accelerated in some cases. And where it has not been accelerated in stage 3 and stage 4 of the recovery, you are going to see an acceleration. But then the second point, which I want to share with you, is that, as we know, many of these investments in digital transformation still don't pay out. Digital transformation is globally a $2 trillion industry in 2020, and 70% of those initiatives still fail. And I want to share with you how, very practical tips, you can make sure that you are successful. This is really something that comes out of the book that Alex talked about, Why Digital Transformations Fail. When I had the opportunity to talk to 100 different leaders across 100 different companies about 5 years ago on what is happening on digital transformation, I found at the core that there are 2 reasons why digital transformations fail. Firstly, because of language, because of definition of what digital transformation is. And the second reason why they fail is because the methodology or the process by which organizations go transform themselves, in most of those cases is incorrect or insufficient, right? So that's really what led me to create this 5-stage model, which is to bring clarity on definition. When I talked to some of those leaders 5 years ago on what do you mean by digital transformation, I got a variety of answers, everything from, oh, it is all hype, don't worry about it. There've always been digital things. There were digital watches in the 1970s, all the way through the other end of the extreme, which is, oh, you have to be extremely careful about that. These robots are going to take over the world. And in reality, that's not really digital transformation. So that's why I had to come out with this 5-stage definition. Stage 1, which is what most companies think is digital transformation, is actually this foundation. It is automation. It is the use of tools, whether it is the tools for document management, or it is the tools for, figuring out how to run your accounting. That's not complete transformation, that's foundation. Stage 2 is when within an organization, whether it is within a government or within a company, you start to see siloed efforts to take some of the business models and convert them to the future. But these are all siloed. Stage 3 is partially synchronized, where there is a company or a government strategy to digitize. And everybody knows that there is a strategy, but the execution is still not completely synchronized. This is where GE was under Jeff Immelt several years ago when they said we want to be a digital company. Stage 4 is actually when the whole company actually is able to digitally convert itself, right? But it is still not stage 5, which is when digital becomes the DNA of the whole organization. And I want to explain the difference between stage 4 and stage 5 by contrasting MapQuest, which many of you will remember, which was an online way for you to figure out how to map the journey from one place to another. And in 2000, this was absolutely disruptive. But today, MapQuest is gone because GPS on your smartphones has disrupted it. On the other hand, I want to contrast that with Netflix. Netflix was disruptive also around 2000 when they said in the US, we will do mail-in DVDs. But then they kept up. They went from mail-in DVDs to essentially streaming video. And then they went from streaming video to original content, House of Cards. And they went from there to international models. That is stage 5, where constant disruption becomes the DNA of the company. And that's how you want to be extremely clear on your language. When you say, I want to be doing digital transformation, are you talking about stage 1 or stage 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? And then towards the end of my talk, I will come back and share with you some tips for being successful at each of these stages. But before I go any further, I need to back up even further and complete a little bit of the introduction. As Alex and Juan said, I have been in the IT and global business services industry for more than 3 decades. 27 years of that was with P&G, where I had the privilege of working all over the world. I almost grew up with the industry of shared services and IT because I started the first ever offshore center in the Philippines in 1993. And then in the US, in Cincinnati, which is where I'm based, the Procter & Gamble headquarters, I led the whole outsourcing wave in the industry, where I was the program leader for a $8 billion outsourcing deal of 2/3 of IT and global business services for P&G. And then I did some acquisitions and divestiture integrations. I was the interim CIO of the Gillette company when P&G acquired them in Boston. And I led the integration of all of their processes and systems into Procter & Gamble. And then I had the opportunity of running IT and global business services all over the world for Procter & Gamble. Global business services is all of the back offices, accounting and HR and IT and supply chain, that kind of stuff. At P&G, it's about a $2 billion, $2.5 billion type of organization. And I had the privilege of kind of running that all over the world. And then, more recently, I now run Transformant, which is an advisory company. I advise mostly Fortune 100 board members and CXOs on how to drive digital transformation. And which gets us back into what is it that makes digital transformation successful, right? If you are any of the board members or CXOs that I advise, you already know that the world is changing around us. If half the jobs in many of these sectors are going to be disrupted by robots in the next 10 to 15 years, we know that we're in the midst of an industrial revolution. We also know that the nature of business is changing because, you're going from, typical employment patterns into the gig economy. And that has implications, not just for HR, but also legal. You also know that the world around us is changing thanks to technology, because if things such as blockchain can eliminate the middlemen, right? Because if you imagine Amazon type systems that allow every little low income householder to capture and sell rooftop energy. If you can imagine microfinancing and how blockchain can make sure that, when you're getting legal aid or some kind of aid money from one place, it goes directly, thanks to blockchain, into the bank account of the poor farmer, that's essentially disruptive, right? And so that's essentially what's happening as part of the Industrial Revolution. You also know that there are also negative implications, such as if, farm workers can be replaced by robots, which in a few years, you're going to be able to buy a farm working robot for like $100. And of course, these robots can work day and night, and they don't need a monthly salary. We know that even manual work like that is being disrupted by technology. We also know it's not just manual work, but certainly high-end intellectual white-collar jobs. Because today, if you go to Yahoo News for sports and finance, about 90% of their short, like 3 or 4 line updates on sports or on stock markets is already being written by software robots today, right? So white-collar jobs are changing. Medical jobs are changing because we have reached a stage where clearly, X-ray interpretation done by robots is already better than expert doctor interpretation. But even that is going to get, further disrupted, because if you can use your smartphone as a device to diagnose things like, AFib and genetic disorders, medicine as we know it is going to change. And the reason why all of this is happening, and the biggest question I get asked when I work with boards and CXOs is, wait a minute, if robots can do all of that, if in the next 3 years you can buy the computing capacity, the brain power of an entire human brain for $1,000, and oh, by the way, by 2050, you're going to be able to buy the capacity of all the brains on Earth for $1,000. This changes the nature of employees in the company. Boards of directors ask me, how do I figure out the organization of the future if I have to make choices between hiring $1,000 robots or multi-$1,000 people, right? So that is basically what we see happening around us. We also see changes, on a more social level, because if things such as, that were considered to be entirely human traits, like lip reading, which is something that, people with hearing impairment rely on. And now you can essentially have robots that can do that with 90% accuracy, whereas, the average accuracy among humans is only 50%, right? What this means is that society is changing around us. And obviously, thanks to people like Elon Musk, it doesn't end there, because the human brain connectivity is going to the stage where science fiction has become reality. They have done tests in a Chinese laboratory where they implanted chips in the brains of a rat. And what they did was they basically taught the rat certain actions, right? How to get food through a maze, right? And then they connected that chip in the rat's brain to another rat who had a chip in the brain, and then they connected both the rats over the internet. And all of the skills that the first rat had learned that was downloaded to their chip was immediately learned by the second rat. This is basically, if you guys remember Matrix, the ability to learn languages and the ability to learn skills by essentially downloading them into people's brains. That is essentially being tested in this particular experiment, right? And of course, this has major implications for us in the legal field. Because if you have robots that can tell by your facial expressions that you're lying, or if you can have artificial intelligence robots basically be used, which they are used today in small claims courts in China and Latvia and Estonia and many other places in the world. Obviously, the world as we know it is changing. That, ladies and gentlemen, is essentially what is happening thanks to the fourth industrial revolution. The first, the second, and the third industrial revolutions were driven by, steam power and of course, electricity and electronics. There is a big difference in today's fourth industrial revolution. Now you have one technology, which is digital technology, which is starting to eat all of the other technologies. It is eating the physical technologies, the Internet of Things, right? Interconnected devices. It is eating, obviously, medical technology, because if genetics is changing medicine, then of course that is being changed. And then it's eating social technology, thanks to Facebook and stuff like that. And so if you're a government leader, if you're a business leader, you're in the middle of this revolution, you say, okay, what do I do? And the answer is very simple. What you do is digital transformation. So coming back to my original message of, firstly, the pandemic is an opportunity of historical proportions. And then secondly, there is a way to be successful. And the first way to be successful is being extremely clear of your context. We are in the midst of an industrial revolution. The organization, the countries, the companies that survive are going to have to do something which is called digital transformation. And digital transformation is not about technology. It is not about artificial intelligence. It is about rewiring. It is about rewiring your business models. So if you used to sell physical stores, you sell online. It is about rewiring your work processes. If you used to have people making decisions on accounting, now you have a different way of doing that. And it is about rewiring your organization. If you used to have people of a certain skills, you have people of a different skills. It is about rewiring your products. It used to have dumb cars, now you have smart cars. You used to have dumb toothbrushes, now you have smart toothbrushes. That is digital transformation. It is about rewiring. And of course, this has huge implications for all of us in the legal field. This became very apparent to me 5 years ago when I was working with Procter & Gamble. Because as I mentioned, I was out there talking to 100 different companies. And one of the companies that I was connected with was a small startup named Winolo, and the CEO of that company, AJ Brostein. And he and I were going back and forth over email, trying to set up a time for us to meet. And as you can see, in the email exchange on the slide, I said on April 10th, I'm out next week. He said, fine, I will let Amy, who I assumed was his admin, to go ahead and set up the meeting. And then Amy came back and provided some options for the meeting. One of my colleagues who was copied essentially found something interesting. So she actually went and double-clicked on bottom left-hand corner x.ai because it said artificial intelligence. And what we discovered was mind-blowing. Amy, who had been communicating on email with us, was not a person. Amy was a robot, right? And when you ask yourself, wait a minute, how could we as humans not know that we were emailing with a robot? You read the emails and there's no way to tell that you're talking to a robot. And then you ask yourself, isn't the secretary, the admin assistant role in a company one of the most sensitive roles, especially if this is the admin assistant to the CEO? And then you look at the date, 2015, 5 years ago. In smaller companies, they were already using robots, not to do everything, but to do something very narrow, just one thing, scheduling, using artificial intelligence. This was a very important learning. In large organizations, we wait for technology to be ready. In smaller organizations, startups, which is the real competition, digitally native startups are the real competition to governments. They are the real competitions to large companies. They don't wait for technology to be perfect. They focus on use cases. And this is very important in the legal industry. We talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about jobs, we talk about cybersecurity. We are wasting our time. We need to talk about very specific use cases. And we have to adopt those use cases, even if that's the only one small thing that is ready, right? And that is important to digital transformation. And that is what I used in my own experience to essentially, create the equivalent organization of Google X at Procter & Gamble, but for a very, very boring area called Global Business Services or Shared Services. And I used that to go after very narrow use cases, such as, why should, in today's world, we ask our employees to do travel and expense reporting? Because you can have data that, comes from credit card companies, and then instead of forcing your people to make travel and expense reports, you essentially know exactly what is happening. And if there's fraud, you can, of course, penalize the employee. But you can get rid of that entire process. You can get rid of people who take physical receipts and match it with expense reporting. You can get rid of a lot of processes. You can do the same thing. You can have artificial intelligence look at contracts instead of having lawyers go through thick contracts. You can actually, at Procter & Gamble, we worked on a software which redlined for us terms that were not acceptable to P&G. And then it also made suggestions of alternatives that would essentially give in certain types of negotiation so that you can gain in other kind of stuff. We use artificial intelligence to essentially do procurement, to do spot buying, to do supply chain planning, to do master data accuracy. These are very, very narrow use cases. These are not platforms that automate all of accounting, all of finance, all of legal. But that's essentially what digital transformation is. So to bring it back, how can you make sure that 70% of your digital transformations are not wasted? This is what you need to do. The two things that I said at the beginning. One, you have to be extremely clear about what you mean by digital transformation. Are you just talking about automation? Are you talking about very narrow use cases that over a period of time cover the entire company? Or are you talking about digitally changing the DNA of the organization, right? That's where the 5-stage model comes in. And the second is executional discipline. In the airline industry, which was one of those big inspiring parallel industries for me on digital transformation, during the First World War, pilot life expectancy was horrible because the industry was in its infancy. Today, the airline industry is used as the benchmark for reliability. Digital transformation as an industry is somewhere in between the airline industry, First World War and Second World War. What we have to do is to make those processes reliable. And the way to do that is by using the same methodology that was used there, which is checklists. And so how to make the 70% of that, the 70% failure rate better, what I've tried to do is provide checklists. And every stage has two major disciplines. So stage one, checklists of committed ownership and iterative execution, and so on and so forth. And that's, there's more information available in my book, which, we can get into later if you're interested. But that's essentially how I try to help companies and governments improve their digital transformation success rates. But let me then bring all of this back into the key message. For the whole world, for governments, for people, for companies, the digital future actually has not been postponed, but it has been accelerated. I read about this, 93-year-old piano teacher who learned computers and Zoom so she could continue giving lessons, piano lessons, to kids. You now have digital literacy dramatically increase. And even if budgets to do digitalization will be reduced, the digital future is actually accelerating, right? And here's what this means to you. In the legal front, there are three areas that we have to be extremely, extremely clear about. The first is that the whole employment manner, remote working, remote learning, that is a global experiment that is here to stay. We are never, ever going to go back to the work processes that used to exist previously. Now, again, it's not like the world is still going to continue on 100% work from home. It's going to come back, of course, but it's not going to be close to 100% work in the office, which it was in many cases before the start of the pandemic. The implications for us in the legal field is that there is a ton of issues that during this scramble stage and the sustained stage, people are not worried about. But this is going to be a big issue as we move to stage 3 and stage 4 of the pandemic economic recovery. Airtight policies on work from home, discrimination, privacy, data security, wages and taxation, especially with remote workers and gig economy. This is a huge opportunity for the legal field, right? The second area is that law firms and in-house legal departments will be changed forever. And it's not just because of the way they do work, but we're going to have to look at contracts that were drawn before the pandemic. In the short term, many of those contracts will have a lot of rejigging that needs to be happened, right? We're going to have to worry about security, cyber security. We're going to change corporate structure. We're going to have to figure out how as every function in these companies change and become more digital, how can we ensure that we have the appropriate kind of legal framework to do that. So for example, if software robots can be considered to be employees as well, what does that mean, right? So that's another huge wave of change that is, changing the world, and that is accelerating. The third, of course, is, the examples that I gave from artificial intelligence use in China and Latvia and Estonia. Courts will continue to go digital because document filing, e-justice, court recording, the existence and the growth of startups that provide self-help legal aid, in many cases, free of cost to the average human citizens, that is accelerating. All of these are irreversible. All of these are a sign of the fourth industrial revolution. All of these are trends that have accelerated and will continue to accelerate as we go from stage 2 to stage 4 of the economic recovery. I talked a lot about use cases. Here's my advice to you. Don't worry about broad strokes technology like blockchain or artificial intelligence. Look at very narrow use cases. At the bottom of this chart, you see a lot of very narrow use cases, e-billing, contract filing and drafting, that kind of stuff. My suggestion to you would be look at how you can figure out which of these are mature and start using it, right? Start using it now. Because this digital transformation isn't going to be about one software that eats the world. It's going to be about many of these use cases that slowly eat every part of every work process. And by way of closing, you may say, well, wait a minute, you're talking about artificial intelligence, you're talking about robots. I am really, really not ready. And I would challenge you to ask yourself if that's the case. Because in today's world, if you basically have 93-year-old piano teachers who are learning how to do Zoom to teach people piano, right? If you have Amy the robot, who can essentially take one of the most human-sensitive roles in a company, or if you can have what you see in front of you, Lawit, which is actually a robot that does stand-up comedy. In a comedy festival in Australia, the whole audience was asked to give a problem to the Lawit so that the Lawit could make a joke about it. And so the audience said, okay, make a joke about climate change. And literally, within 2 seconds, Lawit said, hey, here's a joke. Climate change is here to stay. I, as a robot, am programmed to operate in temperatures or in excess of 90 degrees Celsius. But you, as a human race, are screwed, right? And so if Lawit can take over the most human of jobs, which is actually telling jokes in stand-up comedy, certainly we, as members of one of the most respected professions, the legal profession in the world, highly educated, we can certainly win by taking advantage of this situation to make a difference to the world and to ourselves and to our communities. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions at this stage.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for all the insights and great comments and advice on the trends that we will see in the very near future. Let me just jump with one quick question and then we'll go to the chat to read some of those. In your experience, how has the legal responsibilities and opportunities changed on digital transformation as a result of the pandemic?
As a result of the pandemic, actually, in many of these companies where I do advising, we have seen the legal officer be given, not just a day-to-day seat along with the CEO, but they have become critical to many of the decisions. So in one of the companies that I worked with, on a day-to-day basis, the legal officer you know, used to meet several times over the phone with the CEO on decisions about, you know, what policy should we put in place for remote employees? You know, what is the right risk-reward balance? How do I change existing contracts if I want to save some money? You know, and so on and so forth. So what is happening is that, you know, as work processes and risk profiles and information security and everything has changed, the IT person, the CIO and the legal officer have suddenly gained prominence in these companies. They're working very closely to figure out how to get the, you know, scramble stage and then the sustain stage up and running. But you know, Juan, this is just the tip of the iceberg because you still have stage 3 and stage 4 behind it. You know, as employees start to come back to work, you know, there's going to be a ton of new questions about, well, wait a minute, what's the risk of this? You know, as companies start to change the profile of workers, you know, maybe move manufacturing from one place to another, change contracts, this becomes even more important. So I actually think that, you know, along with the CIO, the legal officer, the general counsel, you know, this is a huge, huge change for them.
Another question, Tony. Do you think the future holds a displacement of humans versus robots? And that obviously applies to different industries and different moments and phases, but also on a general basis, but also on the legal industry.
Yes. So there is absolutely no doubt at all that across industries, there is going to be a displacement of labor, right? And that's one of the reasons why
Si nos pueden poner en mute los micrófonos, por favor. Gracias.
And that's one of the reasons why I like to use the analogy of the Industrial Revolution, because just like in the first Industrial Revolution, where, you know, you had textile workers in the UK whose jobs became displaced by textile machines. That happens in every industrial revolution. However, you asked the question perfectly because you used the word displaced as opposed to, you know, completely, you know, joblessness, right? I want to give you a statistic from projections for the US manufacturing industry. So in the US manufacturing industry, as I said, you know, 40 to 50% of the jobs will essentially be replaced by robots. There is another statistic which says that there will be 2 million manufacturing jobs in the US, high-tech manufacturing jobs, for which there will be no skilled people. And that is completely contradictory. How can we say that 40% of the jobs will go to robots, but that there's going to be 2 million new jobs and no workers for that? And that's what I mean by displacement. So here's what happens with displacement. What happens is that, you know, we all need to continue to upgrade our talent. So we need to be a lawyer, but we need to be a high-tech lawyer, right? And so the low-tech legal jobs, of course, get displaced by robots, but there are more high-tech jobs, legal jobs that are created. And so this displacement is going to happen in the legal industry and in the manufacturing industry and the finance industry. And smart organizations invest in training their employees to take them, to retrain them. So when you hear Jeff Bezos say that, I'm going to invest $700 million to digitally retrain Amazon workers, that's mind-blowing. You say, oh, wait a minute, Amazon is the most tech-savvy company in the world, and you are retraining your employees? That's exactly why he's doing that. That is the equivalent of displacement and what we need to do as leaders.
Okay, 2 questions that can be combined. Talking about the tool of artificial intelligence and how that is being implemented in legal matters for legal verdicts or for online courts and activity regarding that specific type of decision-making process. How do you ensure that data is being treated fairly, that the algorithms are not biased? Because that's one of the main concerns that everybody's talking about.
Yes. So algorithm bias and what is called traceability. So the ability to justify why the algorithm has made that decision is one of the most important emerging fields. So it's actually very, very fascinating because now you have a whole bunch of artificial intelligence startups who are now focusing on those two issues, which is identifying bias as well as in ensuring logical traceability. So the algorithm or the virtual judge made this decision because of this data, and this data came from this source, and this source came from this algorithm, and so therefore this decision was made, right? And I think this is natural in the evolution of any field or any industry, right? These are essentially the pilot error type of things in the airline industry, where there is a next industry that follows it, that tries to understand why are there mistakes, and then it fixes that, and then there's another one that actually comes even after them to fix the errors of that one. So that is essentially what is happening. What that does not mean is that we should stop using artificial intelligence algorithms in courts or small claims or whatever it is. What that does mean is that we have to be extremely cognizant of the limitations, and we have to do quote unquote parallel runs, including start with low risk, traceable, identifiable bias kind of situations, and then keep learning and growing along with that.
We have time for one more question, Tony. You mentioned obviously that deriving from the pandemic, we will face, or industries and companies all over the place will face a tremendous crisis. What happens with digital transformation when the budgets are cut?
Exactly. So this is a very, very real opportunity. So what I'm now advising CIOs and CEOs to do is essentially change the way they were approaching digital transformation, because the fourth industrial revolution has not gone away. It has actually become accelerated. So we are all going to have to do more digital transformation with less money. The creative and the agile CIOs and CEOs will win this particular crisis. And they're going to win this by doing digital transformation differently. What do I mean by doing it differently? I think the way to do it differently is to avoid the mistakes that the technology industry has typically done, which is first spend lots of money of building the foundation so you get the data. And then next, you start to build some algorithms or use cases. And then next, you try to retrain your people and so on and so forth. That way is gone. You don't have the money to do it. What you're going to have to do is be use case focused, as I said. Take the use case where you have the biggest opportunity, and figure out how to use startups and others to get some money out of the system by using that use case, and then take the next one, and so on and so forth. We're going to have to be creative.
Excellent, Tony. Thank you so much. And while Alex changes his slides, again, I want to thank you for being available again to join us in this type of events. And let me just, before we change to the other topics, is there any recommendation of that you can give the lawyers that are here in this event on how we should adapt to these changes?
I would say a couple of things. Firstly, I would say that the fact that you all are here on this webinar means that you believe or you want to learn a little more about how you can digitize your own field. And congratulations, because I think that's half the battle, right? In many cases, people are still sticking their heads in the sand. The second thing I would say is this crisis is an opportunity. Get started. Don't try to do your digital transformation the traditional way of ask for a lot of money or try to collect a lot of funding and then approach it. I would say start iteratively, start small, focus on very narrow use cases. Just get started, right? If you get started, you will build momentum. The flywheel will move. You will save money. You will be more productive, which will create more money and more funding for the next use case, and so on and so forth. That's the most important thing. You know, go ahead, get started, start small. You might fail in a couple of cases, but you will be ahead of the rest of the industry if you do that.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Alex?
Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna share your screen.
And by the way, Tony, thanks for the book. Sure, it's been a tremendous success all over the place. We'll be promoting it in Mexico, obviously, as you know. And we wish you all the best in all your next future travels that obviously you had to cancel, but whatever comes in the future, all the best.
That is true. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the wishes.
And for all of our guests, for next week, we have the crisis in Mexico and all these legal protection, the amparos, and that's going to be a panel, a very interesting panel with Jose Mario de la Garza and 2 other major players in this field. And then on Thursday, we have a very interesting topic from Australia and Asia, showing how the legal world is very small. And then we also have the legal competition coming soon. We're going to be informing you of this. And on October 15, we have the physical Lawit Legal Vision 2020 Summit in Mexico City. And for this one, we're expecting 500 people. And the tickets are already sold because this was going to be done May 14. We have, I think we have like 150 still available. And we can share more information on legalsummit.lawitgroup.com. And then, as you know, in times of turbulence, the biggest danger is to act with yesterday's logic. So please make sure that you take this into consideration. And thank you very much for joining us. It was a great time to share with you.
Thank you, Tony. All the best, and thank you all who had the chance to connect. We love having you, and hopefully you can join us in our future webinars and also in the Legal Summit in October. So thank you. Have a nice day. Have a nice weekend. Take care.